Are you happy? If not, what can you do to be happy? Which country is the happiest in the world? We'll try to make you happy by answering these questions and by helping you to improve your English. Welcome to
Aprender Inglés con Reza y Craig.
Hi, I'm Reza.
And my name's Craig.
And with 50 years of teaching between us, we'll help you improve your English and take it to a higher, happier level. Hi, Craig. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm feeling happy. How are you?
I'm very well. And a big hello to everyone, particularly any new listeners out there. You're very welcome. We hope we can make you as happy as our old listeners. And when we say old, we don't mean that you have been on earth a long time. We mean those who've been listening for a long time. We hope you're happy, and that's why you continue listening. If you're a new listener, maybe we can make you happy too. Who knows?
Who knows? And happy is the topic today, and your happiness is very important to us. Happy is the adjective, happiness is the noun, and joy is a very similar word. Joy, joyful. If you are joyful is the adjective, then you're very positive and you're happy. And there's another noun apart from joy, and that's joyfulness. Joyfulness. Are there any similar words we can help our listeners with, Reza?
Similar, although perhaps not 100% the same, but that's why we're here, to tell you about the differences. So we've got happiness, joyfulness. What about contentment? Craig, would you say to be content is the same exactly as being joyful?
Well, it's similar, but happiness speaks more about the state of feeling happy, being happy, and feeling pleasure. So on the other hand, it's more temporary, whereas contentment is a state of being satisfied. So the main difference, I think, between happiness and contentment is that happiness is an emotional state that you're in, which is usually more short-term. It doesn't last that long, in my experience as well. And contentment is a state which is long-term. It lasts longer. So contentment has more of a connection with calmness, being very calm, and it's more stable. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I would say so, yeah. You can be content, but not necessarily that happy. Just prepared to go on with what you've got, and you can't complain.
Exactly. And there's another similar word to contentment, and that's fulfillment. If you feel fulfilled with your work, then it makes you content. You feel happy with what you're doing. Maybe you have a fulfilling profession, for example, like a nurse or a teacher. So if your work fulfills you, if life fulfills you, then you're happy and content.
Yes, by the way, you'll see a couple of variations of the spelling of this. The verb fulfill can be spelled F-U-L-F-I-L, or it can be double L at the end. So it can be F-U-L-F-I-double-L. Both are considered correct. The double L is more common in American English, but you can write it in British English as well. And the same goes for the noun, fulfillment, F-U-L-F-I, and then either one L or double L, M-E-N-T. Okay, so two variants of the spelling.
Remember, you can see all of these words and everything we speak about in the show notes at inglespodcast.com. Similar words to happy, glad, G-L-A-D. I'm very glad to be here, Reza. And the noun is gladness, G-L-A-D-N-E-S-S.
Craig, would you say I don't know why, but the word glad, the adjective, is fairly common. For example, oh, I'm so glad you could make it. Oh, I'd be really glad if you could come to my party. But the noun gladness is not so common. Strange, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree with that. It's not so common, although glad, similar to happy, is very often used in spoken English. Definitely. Reza is a very cheerful person. If you have a happy nature or joyful nature, then you probably are cheerful.
Oh, Craig's never lived with me. Craig has met me many times, both at my house and at his, but he hasn't actually lived with me. Ask anybody who's lived with me, they might not agree with that.
No, I think you are cheerful. Now, if you go back and listen to a recent podcast we've done on pet peeves, you might not necessarily agree. But even when Reza is grumpy, complaining, and speaking about his pet peeves, the things that annoy him, he does it in a very cheerful way. So I think cheerfulness, and that's the noun, is a big part of your personality. You complain in a cheerful way.
By the way, there is another word which is more informal. Instead of cheerful, you can say cheery. Cheery. But I think that's only really typical in British English. I don't think Americans would say cheery, but British people do sometimes, don't they?
Yeah, they say cheerio as well sometimes, which means goodbye. Cheerio.
Craig, as you know, I'm always delighted to record podcasts with you. It's the greatest point of my month. It's the highlights. I love it when we get together. It causes me great delight. So delight is the noun. It can also be a verb, to delight. It delights me to record podcasts. I feel delighted when I do them.
Well, I'm pleased that you feel delighted. If you're pleased, you're happy. And the noun is pleasure. Be careful of the pronunciation there. It's Pleasure, but the S is not pronounced as a hard S. It's pronounced like the French je. The pleasure, similar to words like leisure or television, the je sound.
Craig, you said that you feel pleased recording podcasts with me. In other words, we could say that recording podcasts is pleasing. You feel pleased. So what's the difference between pleased, ending ed, and pleasing, ending ing?
Well, they're both adjectives. If the adjective ends in ed, it's a passive adjective. So bored, for example, and pleased. And ing would be the active adjective. So if something is pleasing, you are pleased by the thing. If something is boring, that's active, you are bored by the thing.
A bit more extreme than pleased is ecstatic. I better spell that. Ecstatic. That's an adjective, ecstatic. And the adjective ecstatic comes from the noun ecstasy, spelled ECSTASY. And if you're ecstatic, it means you're extremely pleased. It's almost impossible to contain your pleasure or delight. Craig, when was the last time you felt ecstatic?
Well, probably about 1984, I would think.
What happened then?
Probably had sex.
For the first time?
Ecstatic is an extreme adjective. If you feel ecstatic, then you are very, very, very happy. And a similar adjective is euphoric. A euphoric moment. EUPHORIC. And the noun is euphoria. That PH is pronounced like an F, a F sound. Euphoria. Reza, when you think about your Easter holiday that is coming up soon for you, how do you feel?
I feel over the moon. Over the moon. That doesn't mean I've gone crazy. No, over the moon is an idiomatic expression. That means I'm not really talking about the moon. The words don't have their true original meaning. They have a metaphorical meaning. Imagine I'm so happy, I'm so pleased that I'll be having my Easter holiday that I could like fly over the moon. So if you're over the moon, you're extremely happy about something.
Ecstatic. Yeah. Now, on the topic of happiness, we did have a look at the happiest countries, the world's happiest ranking. And if you rank something, you put it in order of popularity, for example. Reza, which country do you think is the world's happiest country?
Well, I thought it was because I thought I heard it on a program, a documentary somewhere. I thought it was Bhutan. Did they perhaps used to be the happiest?
I think it's a bit controversial because Bhutan is famous for having a happiness index in which internally inside the country they measure how happy people are and they publish that every year, but it's not an independent international study. And when I looked at the list on the website, and these results are from Bloomberg.com, the World Happiness Report, they were not in the top 10. So even though Bhutan is a very happy country, it isn't one of the happiest in the world.
I think you've been in Bhutan, haven't you?
Yes, and I was very happy, and the people there were very happy. And it was one of the happiest times and holidays I've had. But yeah, according to this study that we're going to share with you, Bhutan was not in the top 10. So for the fifth year in a row, which means the fifth year consecutively, the happiest country in the world is Finland.
Wow. I'm surprised to hear that.
Why are you surprised?
I've always had an idea. To be honest, it would be more accurate to say a stereotype, I guess, because it's clearly not really based on much proof that I have, much evidence, that all the Scandinavian countries, so that's Finland, Sweden, Norway, perhaps Denmark as well, were countries where there was a lot of depression. I know it's a bit stereotypical, but I kind of associate it with the many hours of darkness because they're far north. They're getting up close towards the North Pole. So in the winter, there are very, very short days, very long nights. It's cold. And I know it's a stereotype, but I kind of associate that with sadness. But I guess there are other things to take into account. Having said that, I can tell you one thing. They may be happy in Finland. I don't dispute your figures, but I do know that there is quite a lot of suicide in Finland. I checked because I did know, or I thought I knew, that there was quite a lot of suicide in Scandinavian countries. And although they're not the number one for suicide, in a report by the World Health Organization from 2019, so it's a little bit out of date perhaps, Finland were 11th out of 41 European countries.
So it wasn't worldwide?
Wasn't worldwide, no. It was 11th out of 41 European countries for the highest number of suicides per capita, per person. Incidentally, the UK was 34 and Spain was 35 out of 41. So relatively, there are few suicides in the UK or Spain per capita compared to Finland. Yet the Finnish are happier. Strange, isn't it?
It is strange. So in the UK and Spain, fewer people are killing themselves, but they're not as happy as Scandinavian countries. Interestingly, a lot of Scandinavian countries ranked, there's that word to rank again, positioned, they ranked very highly, which is interesting to me. Now, we have to be careful because this study conducted by Bloomberg looked at specific variables. You mentioned the weather or the hours of darkness, perhaps in Scandinavia. That wasn't one thing that they checked or asked people. Let me tell you what they did look at for their happiness ranking. They looked at the GDP per capita, and per capita means per head of population. So they ask people these questions, and then they divide the answers by the number of people in the country, comparing to other countries what percentage. Okay, that's per capita. So GDP is gross domestic product, which is how much money the country as a whole is earning, or how much money it has every year. That's one thing they look at. What else do they look at, Reza?
Another feature taken into account is social support. So I imagine that includes things like the welfare state, social security, help for people with disabilities, unemployment benefit if you haven't got a job. And as is fairly well known, all the Scandinavian countries for a long time have had a very good reputation when it comes to welfare and social support. It's one of the reasons why people pay a lot of taxes in those countries. Taxes are very high, but they get a lot of social support back in return. And clearly, they seem to be pretty happy about that.
Another thing that was looked at was the life expectancy. Now, I know that Japan has a very high life expectancy. People live for a long time in Japan, but apparently they have a very healthy life expectancy in countries like Finland and also Denmark, which, by the way, was second in the study. So Denmark is the second happiest country. Another thing they looked at was the freedom to make life choices. In democracies, we have freedom to make choices and control our lives. So there's a lot of freedom in Finland. And generosity was another aspect. So if you give money to charity, for example, if you're generous to other people, then apparently you will be happier. So why not join our Patreon program, give us some money and be happy?
One other thing to add to the list might surprise some of you, or you might not have contemplated it. Perceptions of corruption. Yes, if you perceive, that's the verb from perception, if you have the perception, if you perceive that there's a lot of corruption in the place where you live, it tends to make you sadder. Whereas if you think there isn't much corruption where you live, it makes you happier. And again, it's a stereotype, but a stereotype which is probably true. There is far less corruption in Scandinavian countries, such as Finland, than some other parts of the world. And they do well in the happiness rankings.
Or it could be that it's less visible, that you don't see it as much, which affects the happiness of the population. But interestingly, no Spanish-speaking countries were in the top 20 of this happiness survey for these different aspects that influence happiness. So I don't know why that is, because I always look at Spanish-speaking countries, generally speaking, as being very happy societies. Strange.
Yeah, you get that impression on the surface, but maybe if you scratch, rascar, if you scratch the surface a bit underneath, maybe it's more for show. Maybe you're not so happy, you Spanish speakers. Ay, qué pena.
Now, happiness can be subjective. It really depends on your individual experiences, on your preferences. So we have a short list of some things that can contribute to your happiness. And this is according to research and according to ChatGPT that I use to help me put these notes together. So the first one on the list, Reza, positive relationships. How does that help people be happy?
Yeah, we're talking about having strong connections with friends, family, and other people. And that can provide a sense of belonging. if you belong somewhere, you're part of it, you're integral. So that sense of belonging and social support can lead to a greater sense of happiness.
Next on the list of our happiness ingredients, meaningful work. This means that when you work, you feel a sense of purpose and you feel like you're accomplishing things in your job. You feel a sense of accomplishment. And this can lead to greater satisfaction and more happiness. So maybe your job is affecting your happiness if you don't feel particularly happy.
Craig, I remember you telling me about a job you had years ago. Do you think it was meaningful and it created more happiness in your life? That job where, sorry, I'm laughing, but you were locked in some basement somewhere and you did something with coat hangers. What was it? You counted coat hangers?
Yeah, I counted and sorted and arranged coat hangers for clothes, plastic coat hangers in boxes. The thing that gave me happiness was thinking of the money I was going to get at the end of the week. So sometimes you have to focus on the result and not the process.
Yes, I must admit, whenever I had to sell newspapers made of paper, that's right, youngsters, they used to be made of paper, not digitally online. When I used to sell newspapers on the streets of Berlin in winter, when I was in my 20s in the freezing cold, I did think of the money more than the job satisfaction, I have to admit.
Probably thinking of the beer and the schnitzels and the hot dogs you were going to eat at the end of the day.
That's what kept me going. Good beer and good sausages was the only thing that kept me going.
Speaking of, this is kind of connected to your work, your profession, personal growth. Now, obviously, personal growth is not only in your career, but when you engage in activities, when you do things that challenge you and help you to grow and develop as a person, this can lead to a greater sense of self-esteem. If you think, for example, about teachers, nurses, doctors, helping people, if you think about somebody who is going up in a company and getting promotion, getting more responsibility, more respect, feeling that they're achieving more things, any aspect of growth in what you're doing can lead to happiness. So in other words, don't stand still. Make sure you're constantly learning, expanding your knowledge and growing as a person.
Now, the 4 elements we've mentioned so far may have detractors. A detractor is someone who doesn't entirely agree. Okay, you may be right. But the next one, I imagine, will have no detractors. Physical health. In other words, taking care of your health through exercise, healthy eating, getting enough sleep, and just generally being in good health. Nobody would argue that your happiness doesn't change whether you're healthy or not. Imagine one day you're fit and fine, walking about. The next day you've a terrible accident, and now you'll never walk properly for the rest of your life. You can't tell me that won't affect your happiness, at least in the short term. Yeah, I don't know about the long term, but surely no one could argue with that, could they, Craig?
No, it's important to be physically well and to feel good about yourself. And I think it also depends on personality, because I think someone might have something physically wrong that could be a problem, but because they have a negative outlook on life, it becomes a lot bigger than it actually is. And someone can have a severe disability and be one of the happiest people you know. I think attitude's got a lot to do with it as well.
Yes, sorry to go back to suicide. That's not what this episode's about. It's about the opposite of suicide. It's about happiness. But if you have a look at statistics about that, it's in rich, developed countries where people kill themselves most.
And the next variable in happiness is gratitude. It's a good idea to be grateful for things and to practice gratitude and focus on what you're thankful for. That can really help to create and cultivate a positive mindset. Your mindset is the way you think. So always think of the good things you have in your life and constantly remind yourself to be grateful for those things. Reza, what are you grateful for?
I guess I'm grateful just for having had the luxury of living my life in developed, rich countries. I think quite often in the West, we forget that the majority of the world, the majority of the world's population, doesn't share those conditions. So most of Africa, a large part of South America and Asia, there's a lot of poverty, millions and millions of people. So I think we've got to be grateful, those of us who live in a Western or developed country, but we're very lucky.
We are, yeah. I'm also thankful for health. I'm thankful for relationships. I'm thankful for a satisfying job. And as you say, being born in the country that I was born in the family that I was born in, because it is a bit of a lottery, really. We have no control over where we're born and how we're raised. So we should be thankful for these kind of things, and also for the small things in life. It's important to be grateful for, I think, good coffee in the morning, food on the table, good friends.
Chocolate biscuits.
Chocolate biscuits, which were very nice today, by the way. So I'm very thankful for your chocolate biscuits. And speaking of enjoyable activities, anything connected to leisure and recreation? I spoke earlier about the pronunciation of the word pleasure. Well, leisure has the same j sound in the middle. Leisure, any activity that relaxes you and gives you pleasure. And recreational activities, enjoying those does contribute to happiness. So hobbies, spending time in nature especially, and enjoying what you do in your free time can help to reduce stress and make you happier.
Speaking of pronunciation, as Craig said, it's the j sound in leisure that you need to focus on. But the vowel is pronounced differently by Americans. They say leisure.
They do.
Yeah, so the same as j sound, that doesn't change, but British leisure, American leisure.
Your leisure time.
Another thing that I think is really important personally, though not all experts in the field might agree with me, is simply the climate. You know, maybe it's just easier to have fun, have a good time when it's sunny, warm and dry and plenty of sunlight. Compare that to cold, dark and wet, you know. Generally speaking, most people prefer to be out and about and having fun when it's a kind of Mediterranean type climate, that type of thing. Would you agree?
I'm happier in winter. But let me clarify, I'm happier in a Spanish winter, not necessarily a British winter. I don't like being really hot like it is here in the summer. Those are my worst months of the year. But I'm, very happy in the winter here when it's a bit cold, a bit chilly, perhaps, but nice and sunny. And I do think that Mediterranean countries on the whole really benefit from good weather. I think that adds to happiness.
When Craig says here, don't forget he's talking about Valencia. He's not talking about Asturias, where it's bloody freezing in the winter.
Or Galicia.
And it snows more than the UK. We're not talking about northern Spain, we're talking about Mediterranean Spain.
Do you wake up happy, Reza? Are you a morning person?
Rarely. I rarely wake up very happy, but I often become happy within half an hour or so. But I'm not the sort of person who thinks, great, time to get up, let's get up. No, it's not my style.
You don't spring out of bed with a smile on your face.
No, it's not my style. But very often within half an hour I am. Once I've moved about a bit, I've got the blood flowing, I've got the adrenaline going. And then quite often I think, great, yeah, I've got things to do. But I don't get out of bed immediately feeling happy very often. What about you?
I think I'm worse than you. It takes me maybe about an hour to wake up. So I'm very grumpy in the morning. I don't speak much. I just wake up, make a coffee, sit down, and it takes me, a long time to wake up properly. But once I'm awake, I'm pretty happy, generally speaking. Here's a deep question for you. Do you think that happiness is inside you? Do you think happiness lies within you? Or does it depend on external things? Does it depend on other people?
I think both. Other people and things, not only people, external factors. I've already mentioned, for example, the climate, for example. I believe that that's a factor. But other things like the situation in a country, like if you, as you mentioned, live in a democracy where you have a lot of freedom, personal freedom, you can have the type of lifestyle that you want quite easily. That's a question of the system where you live. If you live in a country like, let's say, Afghanistan, this is 2023, we're recording this. It's a country which is very repressed. You can't really express yourself. The very fact that you're a woman means your life's going to be difficult. I bet that affects your happiness a lot. It doesn't matter how rich you are, how healthy you are, etc. That's going to affect the way you think. Wouldn't you say so?
Yeah, definitely. I think if you're unfortunate enough to live in a repressed society, then yeah, you're not going to be as happy. You don't have as much freedom. But I think also some people are naturally unhappy, even though they're privileged to live in a democracy, in a good society, and they have money and they have a comfortable life. For some reason, they're still unhappy. That can happen, and that is inside, and that is a deeper problem. They have to look inside themselves and maybe change the way they think.
What about technology, Craig? We depend a lot on technology these days. Can it help bring you happiness or sadness? Or maybe a bit of both or neither?
I think it's a tool. It's something you use, and it's great when it works. It's a bit like your washing machine. If it's working, you've got clean clothes and you've saved some time. It's fantastic. But when it gives you problems, then yeah, it's not so good. So I don't know. What do you think?
I think a bit of both, yeah. If you are able to contact people who bring happiness to your life through technology, well, that's definitely a plus. You might not have been able to speak to those people that bring you happiness who live in New Zealand.
That's
and
true.
You live in Spain.
Very true.
It's through technology. But what if you're a teenager or maybe even an adult, but it's even worse for young people, and you're being trolled by someone online? They're saying horrible things in your social media. They won't leave you alone. They're picking on you. They look for any excuse to try to make you look stupid, look bad. That's technology then contributing to making you unhappy.
And also people who have problems with their image, especially young people who are constantly on Instagram and other social networks, seeing videos and photos of people with perfect lives and perfect bodies and a fantastic group of friends and living the dream. And they think, oh, I want to be like that. Why am I not like that? And I think that social pressure, that peer pressure can make young people unhappy.
I think very often when it comes to happiness on social media sites, it's not so much what you see or read as what you don't see or read. For example, you get somebody talking about, oh, look, here's a picture of me with my boyfriend or girlfriend in the pyramids. Here we are eating this fancy food, etc. And this happens every day or every week, whatever. And then suddenly they don't mention their boyfriend or girlfriend. They don't mention him either negatively or positively. They just don't mention him. I wonder why that is. It's because they've had a row. Somebody's been cheating. A row is an argument. Yeah, some kind of disagreement. And they won't mention it because it might be the type of person who's obsessed with giving this image of the perfect happy life. So very often it's not so much what you can see or hear, but what they don't tell you when it kind of goes blank or suddenly the boyfriend or girlfriend is photoshopped out of their profile picture, but they didn't mention it. Why not?
Yeah, their arm is in the air, but their arm is not around anything. It's just floating in the air because the person's disappeared. Yeah.
It's almost as if for some people, for a lot of us, talking about your unhappiness on social media is kind of taboo. It's boring. It's grim. It's a downer. We want to hear about your happiness, but don't write about your unhappiness. That what a drag. We don't want to hear that.
So here's a final question for you, Reza, and for you listening, because we want to hear your opinion on what we've said today. So please answer this question as well. Is there anything you could do or change to make you happier?
I think I could and should have a better outlook on life. Believe it or not, listeners, younger listeners, Microsoft didn't invent the word outlook. It means perspective, your perspective on life. So I think I could have a better outlook. Sometimes I'm unnecessarily negative, and I think that would make me happier. What about you?
I think if I stopped watching the news, that would make me happier. And I'm not addicted to the news, but I do watch too much of it because I like to keep up to date with what's happening in the world. So I do look at the news or listen to the news on a daily basis. And let's face it, it's usually bad. There's usually some war somewhere or some group of people suffering or something not going right for somebody or somebody dying. So it's really, really depressing. And I think if I cut the news out of my life, I would generally be a happier person. So I might do that. And then I'll say to you every week, Reza, what's been happening in the news? And you can depress me for 10 minutes or so. But now it's your turn to practice your English. What makes you happy? Is there anything that you could possibly change to make you happier? Let us know. Why not send us a voice message? You can do that easily by going to our SpeakPipe service. That's speakpipe.com/Ingles podcast. You only have 90 seconds to leave your message. So prepare that. Make sure you don't go over 90 seconds or send us two. We don't mind. If people want to attach an audio file to an email or just write an email, Reza, how can they contact us that way?
You could send your comment to craig@inglespodcast.com or to me, belfastreza@gmail.com. You can see these addresses in the show notes.
And this podcast is sponsored in part by mansioningles.com. To visit the online store and see courses that are sold there, go to store.mansioningles.net.
As always, at the end of every episode, we like to thank those people who donate money to us voluntarily. They help us by giving us $1.50 per month, that's the minimum, through a scheme called Patreon. And as a thank you to people who sponsor us through Patreon, we give them instant access to recent audio transcriptions. If you might be interested, have a look at the link in the show notes. It's patreon.com/Inglespodcast.
Unfortunately, we don't have time to thank you all individually for your support, but we will say hello and thank you to supporters who have joined us recently. And they are Jaume Ferrer Muñoz, Luz Viviana Moreno, Carlos, Maria Madariaga, Pedro Carrillo, Susana. And special thanks to Francisco Otero, and Arnhild Kessel, who are donating more than the minimum $1.50. Thank you to you and to all of our lovely Patreon supporters. You make us very happy.
And if you enjoyed this podcast, please tell your friends. Get as many people as you can listening. And if you're an old listener, if you're an old AIRC464, not alcoholic, AIRC, Aprender Inglés con Reza y Craig. If you're an old AIRC464, thanks very much for your continued support. And if you're a new listener, please stick with us. We are sure you'll learn a lot and we'll try to make you happy.
And joyful. We don't know exactly what we're going to be joyful about next week, but there will be a podcast and we'll speak about something that will help you with your English. In the meantime, thank you very much for listening this week. Have a lovely week. And it's goodbye from me.
And it's bye-bye from me.
The music in this podcast is by Pitts. The track is called See You Later.